Hi, I'm David Brynn. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Family Forests. Today we're standing in just about the middle of the Center West Ecoregion in the highlands of Lincoln. And in the background is Mount Abraham, a spectacular mountain in the northern Green Mountain Range. And in the immediate vicinity is the Beaver Meadow Brook, spectacular upland water that's clean and clear and highly oxygenated. It's a spectacular river in that it comes from generally healthy forests. It's a wonderful place to explore the notion of forest health. Aldo Leopold said that health is the capacity for self-renewal, and conservation is our effort to understand and preserve that capacity. And that's really what Vermont Family Forests is all about. And over the next few of these little programs, we're going to explore that in Vermont's Center West Ecoregion. Center West Ecoregion goes to the north to Winooski River. It goes to the east side of the Mad River. It goes down to the south side of the Middlebury River, and it goes out to Lake Champlain. And it's an area of land in Vermont that is about 630,000 acres. The reason we're talking about Center West ecoregions, or ecoregions in general, is that these are the places about this scale that people call home. I know I call this place home. This is a piece of Vermont that I love, that I kind of know. And I have an affinity to it to the such that I move to action. And I think it's a really nice scale for the kind of work that we're proposing. What's being asked of us with this rapidly changing climate and all the associated stresses and disturbances that it is bringing in, things that our forests haven't witnessed, requires that we develop an earth-centered view. Much like the native peoples, the native Abenaki people, who have been in these watersheds and in these lands for 100 centuries. They understood that they were held by the land. They didn't hold the land. They were part of the land. They were members of the land. And that consciousness is being called upon and is calling out for us to develop that. And so here we are. Today we're going to kind of set the stage, and then we're going to go through and review a recent little PowerPoint presentation. It goes through the challenges and lists some opportunities for us to consider. Much of this is focused on the Vermont Use Value Appraisal Program, a program that most Vermonters who know anything about it absolutely love, because it allows land to be taxed at its use value, something that allows somebody to hold the land rather than develop it. So I think it's fair to say that most people who are involved with land in Vermont really value the use value appraisal program. There are many perspectives as to what the use value appraisal program should accomplish. It's almost 3 decades old. It was started many years ago, before we were as conscious of the rapidly changing climate as we should have been. But the fact is, things have changed. And the current use program has to change to catch up with it. And so that's the background of what we want to talk about. And we want to explore real things, real applications. As John Dewey, Vermont's amazing educator, once wrote, "Without application, principles and ideals have no bearing and no test." We're all about bearing and test. And in our times together, we plan to really tease out some of these things so that we can get a better handle on the kind of forestry that we should be practicing in the particular spots across the landscape. We're going to emphasize the fact that all sustainability is local. and that you cannot make big blanket sweeping statements about what is sustainable. What is sustainable in the Vergennes clays may not be sustainable in the Lyman soils in the uplands. We have to be aware of that. So all sustainability is local, and we have to change and make our forestry appropriate. Some of the land is very appropriate for intensive use. We call it production forestry. Other parts of the land are so fragile, so unique, so easily disrupted, that they are calling out to just be left alone. We call that wildland forestry. And then there's a whole bunch in between that allow for light tending and removal of high quality forest products, while also protecting the ecological integrity of those lands. Hello, my name is David Brynn. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Family Forests, a nonprofit forest conservation organization located in Bristol, Vermont. We recently had the opportunity to testify to the Vermont House Natural Resources Council Committee on possible changes to Vermont's current use appraisal program that would allow private family forest owners to enroll their forest wildlands. The following is an enhanced video of that presentation. To the Western Abenaki people who lived here and called this place Ndakana, my homeland, we express gratitude for all of this land you cared for over 100 centuries, 10,000 years. I live and work in Vermont's Center West Ecoregion as a licensed Vermont forester. I had the good fortune of imagining and founding Vermont Family Forests over 25 years ago when I was serving as the Addison County Forester at the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. Today, I will try to make the case for adding a new category of land called wildland forestry to the use value appraisal program. Before we begin, I want to welcome into this presentation some of the forests, some of the wild forests that I have had the opportunity to manage by showing a few photos. The mission of Vermont Family Forests is first and foremost forest ecosystem health, earth-centered conservation, careful management, and growing a forest culture. We are trying to cultivate an ecological ethnicity in the watersheds of home to promote forest ecosystem conservation based on the keystone virtues of compassion, prudence, and gratitude, and to promote forest ecosystem health as expressed in a variety of things, but especially in flood and drought resilience, clean water, wildlife species richness, and sequestration and storage of atmospheric carbon. My story today has 4 parts. There'll be an introduction. I'll make the case for adding wildland forestry to UVA and for expanding practices for ecological forestry. I'll try to imagine and adopt some practices for wildland forestry, and then I'll have a brief closing. Introduction. Aldo Leopold got it right when he said, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise." We are living in the Anthropocene, and humans are the dominant influence. We are overwhelming the capacities of the earth for self renewal. We have created a climate crisis. We must call upon the regenerative power of that crisis to heal the earth as earthlings. Migration from Vermont. This by Lewis Stilwell, published in 1950. 10,000 years of Abenaki homeland, Indakana. Champlain exclaimed, "Voila, Vermont, verdant mountains." Not green mountains, verdant mountains. Spongy catchments. Settlers had 25 good years, followed by discouragement and migration. Why? The universal fact of exploitation. No permanent economic footing. Soils that deteriorated very quickly as the humus was burned up. Pasturage that cannot support a larger population. Gifford Pinchot, conservative logging, practical forestry. These are the foundations of production forestry. Tree protection, reproduction, crop trees, ripe trees ready for the axe. These are the forestry elements that I studied when I attended the University of Vermont a gazillion years ago. But this is what came from Gifford Pinchot's work, and we are grateful to Governor Pinchot for that work, which he introduced to us in 1905. But things have changed since 1905. Humanity's 10,000-year-old experiment in mode of living at the expense of nature, culminating in economic globalization, is failing us. A courageous change in attitudes and activities is urgent. Principles. The ecosphere is the center of value for humanity. Earth systems depend upon their own integrity. An earth-centered worldview is required again. Our ethics must be grounded in nature again. We must value complexity, diversity, and wholeness of cultures and ecosystems. Earth-centered ethics will support justice. Actions. As John Dewey said or wrote, without application, principles and ideals have no bearing and no test. We must protect Earth's creative potential and become an earth-centered Indakana again, an earth-centered Vermont. Making the case for adding wildland forestry as a land use category and expanding the practice of ecological forestry in Vermont. There are 7 essential criteria for forest resource management and forest ecosystem conservation. Plant and animal biodiversity, productive value-adding enterprises, forest health, stored carbon, humus-rich soils, clean, clear, highly oxygenated water, many social benefits, and a legal framework, including such things as the use value appraisal program that support all of it. As we explore this topic, it's really important that we understand a few important terms. Wetland, a natural community saturated even in the growing season. Woodland, a natural community dominated by trees in an open canopy. Forest, a natural community dominated by trees, but with a deep, dense, and full canopy. Wildland is not a natural community. Wildland is, by definition, a land use category that is calm, quiet, and self-willed. There are really three classes or groups of forest land uses. There's production forestry, which is characterized by wise use, sustained yield, control. Economic motivation is primary. Ecological forestry, mimicking nature, care, ecological, ethical, and economic motivations. Wildland forestry, natural, quiet, self-willed, wild, with ecological and ethical motivations. So why do forest wildlands matter? There are many functions of forest wildlands, but here are 7 or 8 that are absolutely essential. Protect the full range of biological diversity. They serve as reference sites. They provide aesthetic, spiritual, and recreational values that do not occur in managed forests. They protect water quality better than any other land use. They protect soil stability, productivity, and infiltration capacities far better than any other land use. Wild forests sequester and store more atmospheric carbon, all things being equal, than any other land use. And they create more flood and drought resilience than any other land use. I'm going to take this moment now to introduce you to Vermont's Center West Ecoregion. This part of my story takes place here as an example. It could be told just as well in any place, where any Vermont ecoregion, but I live here. I'm a commoner here. This is the homeland that I love. North to the Winooski River, east to the east side of the Mad River, south to the southern side of the Middlebury River, west to Lake Champlain. 10% of Vermont, 600,000 plus acres. In November of 2019, Vermont Family Forests gathered a group of commoners who live, who work, and who play in Vermont's Center West Ecoregion. We asked ourselves, what do we value most in this place we call home? These are some of the responses that came out. Love of land, soil restoration, honor the first peoples, honorable harvests, gratitude, eating the forest, organic family forestry, clean, clear, highly oxygenated water, atmospheric carbon sequestration and storage, wildlife species richness, re-enchantment, stable, humus-rich, productive soils, ecological diversity, slowing, spreading, and sinking storm flows, flood and drought resilience and recovery, invasive plant species resistance, forwarding lines of grace, high quality, diverse, high value timber products, high quality, energy efficient, local, primary, and secondary value adding, high quality, well educated, well paid, properly equipped, and insured workforce, an outstanding natural beauty, high quality forest based recreation, places to snowmobile, peaceful and quiet places, dark skies at night, social justice, places to hunt, less stuff, cultural restoration. Fact, every acre cannot be everything to everyone. So what should we do? Forest land triad, production forestry, ecological forestry, wildland forestry. We need to employ a triad mapping process, at least to guide our efforts. Here's a conceptual allocation of forest land uses in the Center West Ecoregion. This is not a top-down thing. This is not a thing that we envision being imposed upon us by Montpelier. No, this is something that we are investigating, welcoming, and designing and getting a feel for as to how it can fit well within the Center West Ecoregion. And that means listening to the landowners who hold the forests and listening to the forests that are held by the landowners. There's production forestry, forest resource management, which is really about economic returns, and it's guided by acceptable management practices and the silvicultural guides from the U.S. Forest Service by and large. Wise use of forest stands, competition and control, stewardship. In the middle would be ecological forestry, forest ecosystem conservation, ecological and social well-being, OCPs, optimal conservation practices, care and honorable harvest of forest ecosystems, mutual aid, taking care of each other, friendship. And then, lastly, and definitely the smallest category in Vermont, some say it's somewhere between 2 and 3% Vermont on a good day, Gaia theory and proforestation, intact forest ecosystems, wildland protection practices, forests as self-willed organisms, aesthetic empathy, membership. This little chart is inspired by, this one was written up by Mark S. Ashton, and I've changed a few of the words. For example, production forestry listed here, Mark lists as intensive forestry. Wildlands forestry, I think, is natural lands forestry. But here's the gist of it, is that there's a way of deciding how much in these 5 different land use groups, but especially in 3 forestry groups, what percentage of the landscape would be in production forestry, ecological forestry, or wildlands forestry. In the Appalachians, for example, 1% is urban, 5% is agriculture. Only 5% in his model is about 5% is production, and 59% is wildland forestry, largely because of the national parks. Well, which biophysical regions are found in Vermont's Center West Ecoregion? Well, Champlain Valley is the largest. It's the western part of the Center West Ecoregion. Combined, the northern Green Mountains and the southern Green Mountains are the next largest. The Champlain Hills is the smallest and the sweetest of the ecoregions. Now here is a conceptual allocation of land uses for the northern and Green Mountains. Production forestry, 25%. Ecological forestry, 30%. Wildland forestry, 15%, thanks to the U.S. Forest Service wilderness. Again, these aren't cast in stone. These are just a conceptual allocation. The numbers will come out of a dialogue of an engaged citizenry that loves this place called home. And it gives us a framework. It gives us a way of trying to figure out where we stand in something that will be resilient in the face of a rapidly changing climate, or as resilient as we can help it be. Could range from 10 to 30% production forestry, 40 to 80% ecological forestry, 7 to 15% wildland forestry, at least for starters. The next thing we need to figure out is how to match the governance with the holders of the assets. This is something that is really, really important, and it is largely lacking in our conversations. Public.
Owners hold title, the land is enclosed, there is a boundary, they own the soil and the plants. Private. Owners hold title, land is enclosed, there is a boundary, they own the soil and the plants. Commons. Unenclosed, there is no boundary. Commoners hold the water, the wildlife, the air. We advocate for commoning practices in the place we call home. We do it because we love this place. The state is our trustee. UVA, use value appraisal, should focus more on commonly held assets. The water commons, the wildlife commons, and the air commons, particularly carbon sequestration and storage, and especially in this time of a very rapidly changing and unpredictable climate. Water commons. Using the Vermont Conservation design, a powerful tool, not only tool that would be in our toolkit, but a welcome one, it's a great place to start. Highest priority on this map would be the brown riparian corridors. Blue are streams, major rivers, ponds, and lakes. And there's the wildlife commons. Pink, highest priority, rare, threatened, and endangered species. Blue, major rivers, ponds, and lakes. Air commons, with a focus on carbon sequestration and storage, which is so essential right now. Highest priority, purple, interior forest blocks. Gold, connectivity blocks. Green, diversity blocks. Blue, major rivers, ponds, and lakes. Here's a combination of all three. The combined highest priority common assets are water commons, our wildlife commons, our air commons. I would submit that the use value appraisal program should put most of its emphasis there. Not all of it, but most of it should be on those three elements. A combination of the diverse products and services associated with the forestry land use triad of production forestry, ecological forestry, and wildland forestry in the most suitable places. This is key. Wildland forestry is not enough. We need to do well. We need to preserve those elements of water, wildlife, and air when we practice ecological forestry, and we need to do it also where we practice production forestry. So again, this is a conceptual triad graphic, 10 to 30%, 40 to 80%, 7 to 15%. The next thing we need to do is we need to identify key practices for production forestry, ecological forestry, and wildland forestry. Well, fortunately, production forestry has its AMPs and its silvicultural guides. Some of these have kind of aged out and need to be revised, but at least there is a suite of guides and practices available. Ecological forestry is something that Vermont Family Forests for 25 years has been working on, and we call our practices optimal conservation practices. There are others who are working on this same thing. They use other terms, but here are some examples just to give you a feel for what these things look like. For example, we try to limit road, trail, and path extent to a total of 5% of the area served. We try to keep our roads and paths and trails relatively flat, 7% grade or less. We build under dry summer conditions. We use broad-based dips to the maximum practical extent to avoid overland flow. We try to avoid ditches to the extent possible to reduce storm flow concentration. We avoid building access in places that are over 35% slope or adjacent to streams. We try to log under frozen winter conditions. We use foragers. We directionally fell low-value timber across slopes and leave it in place to slow spread and sink storm flows. We avoid clear cutting and whole tree harvesting. We manage for many large, secure and cavity trees. We manage for large down trees. We grow the largest trees possible. We leave as much biomass on the site as possible. We promote a vertical stand structure. We monitor forest health, including soil erosion and compaction, water quality, and carbon sequestration and storage. In all of this, really, our goal is to convert ditched watersheds to spongy catchments. Now, I would like to spend much of the rest of my time on imagining and adopting practices for wildland forestry. We could call these wildland protection practices, WPPs. They can stand right there next to the OCPs and the AMPs. Now, ecological value of forest wildlands are many, but some of the most important ones is that they produce the highest quality water. They sequester and store the highest levels of atmospheric carbon over time. They protect fish and wildlife species. They slow, spread, and sink peak storms. They attenuate flooding and drought, and they resist invasion by invasive exotics. We know that there are certain shapes and sizes of forest wildlands that are best. Large is better than small. Close is better than distant. Round is better than long and thin. Clustered is better than dispersed, and connected is better than unconnected. So effective wildland practice would include keeping forest wildlands wild, enlarge forest wildland areas, protect and widen riparian wildland forest buffers, avoid fragmenting and disturbing by manipulating habitats, minimize and carefully design access, allow beaver-influenced ecosystems to expand, let all biomass decompose on site. Amend UVA to welcome more healthy, intact wildlands forests. Fund and actively engage citizen and commoner science in wildlands forest monitoring and much more. There have been major successes with things like Riverwatch in this area, but they're very much underfunded, rely a lot on volunteers, and we should be putting an awful lot more emphasis there. Remove the UVA roadblocks and add more permanently conserved forever wild forest wildlands to Vermont's regenerative and working landscape. Leopold said, keeping every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. A trusting attachment to the ecosphere and aesthetic empathy with surrounding nature, a feeling of awe for the miracle of the living earth and its mysterious harmonies is humanity's unrecognized heritage. We need to modify UVA to recognize a triad of forest land uses: production, ecological, and wildland. We need to map areas with the highest priority conservation values to help inform us. Encourage production, ecological, and wildland forestry accordingly. Promote permanent forest wild conservation of the highest priority forest wildlands. We face a very uncertain climate future. We need to change our worldview. We need to adopt an earth-centered worldview. We are earthlings. It is the place we call home. We should create a forest land use triad of production, ecological, and wildland forestry in Vermont's UVA. We should focus on water commons, wildlife commons, and air commons. And the storage of atmospheric carbon should be a focus across the landscape. Add more permanently conserved wildland forests to the mix, and work for a regenerative and working landscape by opening the doors of Vermont's Use Value Assessment Program to wild forests and wildland forestry. Vermont's forests will do the work if we let them. Let's let them. This talk is dedicated to Dr. John Stanley Rowe, who was born on June 11th, 1918, and he died April 6th, 2004. His Earth Manifesto was published 2 days before he died. And to my daughters, Devin and Callie, and grandchildren, Ellie and Miles.